Hi everyone, this is Phil Travis, and this announcement is for the 60s. America in the 60s. This week we are going to be looking at society and culture in the 1960s, and we're going to be reading from our Farber textbook, The Age of Great Dreams. We'll be reading chapter 3. We'll also be reading from our 60s reader, chapter 8, this week. We have also an interesting assignment this week. I'm going to have you watch a very popular American television series from the 1960s. Of course, the 60s is associated with a real explosion in televisions. And, of course, televisions help to shape the perspectives of Americans. And so you'll notice in the reading this week that Farber talks quite a bit about televisions and their role in engaging the American people and American society. And so there's a television show, and I'll save it for you, but there's a television show that is discussed at some length in Farber's reading for this week from The Age of Great Dreams. And I want everybody to watch the, again, 22-minute episode of this 1960s television series. I want you to watch this episode. I'll have it posted in Canvas for you, of course. And I want everybody to engage it with the reading and be able to explain, why is this significant? What does Farber want us to think about here? So that's primary part of our discussion forum this week. So this week we have our discussion forum. We'll be talking more about the paper assignment, which will come later in the class. We'll talk more about that next week. We'll also be getting close to a first exam coming up, so we'll talk more about that next week as well. But as of right now, this week, just for the discussion forum, read the 60s, Age of Great Dreams, chapter 3, and the 60s, chapter 8. Okay, so the factoid for this week. Remember, send me the factoid no later than Wednesday by midnight. Gain that extra point on a test score at the end of the term. We'll probably be having our first, well, not probably, we will be having our first test soon. So after you take that test, you just want to remember that if you're doing these extra credit factoids, that is going to help pull your test score up at the end of the term. And even if you had 100 on it, you'll go up by the amount. I still add those points to it. So it really helps your score a lot. So make sure you're participating in this extra credit activity. Get your bonus points. It'll really help your score out at the end of the term if you need it. So here's the factoid. In this class, we discuss a number of very, very significant civil rights movements. Of course, the African-American civil rights movement. But of course, there's also the, to use the language of our age today, the LGBTQ movement was launched in the 60s. And of course, the Native American movement was launched in the 60s. And of course, the women's movement was launched in the 1960s. None of those would you really say, particularly African-American civil rights or the women's movement, they weren't universally launched in the 60s. They all have a history predating that. But in terms of the real scale of the movement, it's in the 1960s where you really see those movements come to a new level of activism in American society. The women's movement during the 1960s was based, and this is the factoid, the women's movement was based to a large degree on the right to control a woman's body, on the right to control the reproductive health of a woman. And of course, the birth control pill was a huge revolution in this respect during the 1960s, though the administering of it could be done in a way that was very demeaning towards women. As they were asked, oftentimes by doctors, they were asked very many offensive and personal questions when trying to get the pill. But creating an equal sort of reality in America was a big part of the women's movement. And a big part of that was women gaining the right to their reproductive health, women gaining a right to the birth control pill, or also a right to choose abortion. So the factoid for this week is that the legislation, the Supreme Court decision, I should really say, Roe v. Wade in the early 1970s, that mandated that states could not prevent women from getting an abortion, was a real culmination of the women's movement in the 60s. During the 1960s, there were states that had legalized abortion. Ronald Reagan, actually, when he was governor of California, signed one of the most, I guess, for lack of a better term, one of the most liberal bills that supported legal abortion in California. New York had legal abortion, but of course, many states in the Union banned abortion. And as a result of that, there was a really crisis in the United States of women in the 1960s that were really forced to obtain abortions through illegal sort of underground methods. And so there were documentaries and news reports that were done on this in the 60s. And the reality is that there were thousands of illegal abortions that were carried out in hotel rooms or in small apartments and in other places during the 1960s. And this came at great risk to the health of the women, and of course was a black market industry that was a product of the fact that the majority of states in the Union at the time had a ban on abortion. So the fact of it for this week is that the Roe v. Wade decision of the early 1970s was perceived in many respects as a real culmination of the women's movement of the 1960s, because it was seen as women finally gaining a legal right to control their bodies and their reproductive health. And to a large degree, it was not only a reaction of that, it was a reaction to the fact that there was a real problem in the United States with illegal abortions during the 1960s that were done in situations that were not regulated or controlled, and could as a result be very dangerous to the individuals receiving them. So the women's movement and the movement to gain rights to choose and reproductive health, whether it is the birth control pill or abortion, which was realized with the Supreme Court decision Roe v. Wade. That decision was a culmination of, in many respects, the 1960s women's movement. It was led, among others, by individuals like Gloria Steinem, of course. So email me that factoid no later than Wednesday by midnight. Let's have a great week. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see you in the discussion forum. And I'll get a study guide together for you pretty soon for the test. We'll be getting pretty close to the test in this class as we're moving. We're not quite there yet, but we're getting closer to halfway point in the term. The test will be pretty soon. We'll also start to get some information out there for the project in this class. So if you have any questions, shoot me an email. I'll see you in the discussion forum.